Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chafee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of the Plant-Free MD. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chafee, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Elizabeth Bright. In your practice currently, so you deal with hormones. Are you treating patients at the moment, or are you
Yes, online only. I mean, I also use the carnivore diet, high-fat carnivore diet as a treatment modality. So
Yeah,
that's
right.
my first book came out in 2016,
Mhm.
quite some time ago, but I was talking about high-fat carnivore and women's hormones and how basically the menopausal symptoms don't have anything to do with menopause. So I wrote it right around I went into menopause. So and I
Mhm.
had gone carnivore then. But in the 80s and 90s, there was Suzanne Summers who was pushing the bioidentical hormone. When I hit menopause, I Googled it, and these are the only things you see online, and I was quite upset by that because I didn't associate myself. I'm a Jiao master. I went back and forth to Hong Kong. I trained, and so it's not something that I associated these symptoms were not what I was experiencing,
Mhm.
and it just really made me angry. So I did a lot of research into it, and it basically comes down to the fact that most 85 to 95% of both male and female steroid hormones are synthesized in the adrenals. So when your ovarian production of estrogen, for example, diminishes, it doesn't go away because they are still being synthesized in the adrenals. But medicine did not know that until 1988 when they saw men who'd been castrated, their testosterone levels went down initially, and then they came back up because the adrenals were continuously synthesizing testosterone. You're taking away stimulants
Mhm.
because you're not eating carbohydrates.
Mhm.
There's more fat. So the high fat is an important part of it. You make, if you look at the steroid hormone cascade, they're all made out of cholesterol. So if women are concerned, I mean, it starts over here on the left with cholesterol, then pregnenolone, then progesterone, and uh, estrogen is all the way to the right of the cascade under testosterone. So
Mhm.
you can't make any of these hormones if you're not eating any cholesterol, which is what
Mhm.
most women do. They avoid cholesterol because they want to be real thin, and also because they're told not to eat any fat because their heart will explode. So, I mean, I know my mother and my grandparents, my family's from the South, and they all stopped eating. They started using Crisco in the 50s, and then the Ansel Keys right around the time 1958, the Ansel Keys 7-country study came out. Right around that time was when I know my grandparents stopped eating animal fat.
Just saw an article that was posted about Crisco and how Procter and Gamble bought Crisco. I think it was from the Germans, and it was like a machine lubricant for like
Yeah,
tank wheels, and then
yeah, exactly.
they paid off the American Heart Association $20 million in today's valuation to
Hmm.
lie and say that it was very heart healthy and better for the heart
Right.
than animal fats were, which is just insane.
It's not only now. This
Mhm.
started in the Victorian era, basically, which is what I talk about in my second book, Puberty and Adolescence. Fat and meat have been demonized. Women have been going through this a lot longer than, since 1958.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that they get away with it because that is what has been on the agenda for quite some time, culturally speaking.
Similar influences on the nutrition and dietetics associations in America and the naturopathy. Is that correct? Were you taught a lot
They're
of
all
plant-based
plant-based
recipes?
now. It's very
Yeah.
unfortunate. It's very plant-based now. Osteopathy and naturopathy both remove obstacles to healing. So basically, we
Mhm.
leave the body alone and we take away things. That's why an elimination diet is perfect, because you take away the thing that could be causing inflammation,
Mhm.
uh, could be stimulants and things like that. So instead of taking something, which is very difficult for some people to accept, we are raised in our culture, let's take something and make us feel better. I mean, people
Mhm.
were taking mercury and laudanum
Mhm.
as medicinal preparations, right? So often when you're removing something is the way to go to see what's left and how you can heal by removing things that are not necessarily what you as a human being evolved to eat. So I kind of turned that on its head because I was taught that in school, a lot of plant, a lot of supplements, lots of, osteopathy is more an adjustment. And I got into naturopathy because as an osteopath, women of a certain age were coming to me with the same symptoms. And I would adjust them and I would be very frustrated because they'd be back in 2 weeks. So somebody else might say, great, come on, I'll adjust you again, pay me.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, I was my training and my teaching in the years and years I went to school, I was supposed to fix something. So why did they not stay fixed? So I decided to go back to school and figure and learn why that would be. So it was mainly inflammation, tissue inflammation, ligamentous laxity that would, their vertebra would not stay where I put it because of ligamentous laxity. All those things brought me to the realization that diet is really important. Endocrinology is what the term that was coined in 1988 when they realized that the adrenals are actually synthesizing all of the steroid hormones, where since the 20s and
Mm,
30s, medicine has been focused on the testes and the ovaries, but they keep selling hormones to women.
mhm.
So hormone replacements. Um, when we know that they're all synthesized from the fat we should be eating. So you can see sort of the progression, stop eating fat. You need hormones get worse because you're not eating fat. And then you add hormones because you're told to avoid fat. I mean, we humans have a
Right.
gallbladder. Why do we have a gallbladder? Because we're supposed to eat a lot of fat. It's supposed
Yeah.
to store all the bile that's supposed to render all this fat, animal fat that we eat soluble, but 80% of all cholecystectomies are on women.
Yeah.
And that's the highest rate of surgery in the US,
Mm.
gallbladder removal.
What is that? That's a woman in middle age who's probably had a couple kids, has some extra baby weights, trying to lose weight. And everybody knows if you want to lose fat, you have to stop eating fat. And they just stop eating fat and stop eating fat. And
Hmm.
then all of a sudden they go back to eating fat and they go, oh, that hurts. They go to the doctor. Oh, you've got gallstones. And it's because you eat too much fat. And as I point out, it's because you're not eating enough fat.
Right.
Because if you eat enough fat, then you're gonna use that bile. It's not going to be able to sit there long enough to solidify into to crystals and form stones. I
Right.
mean, just in physiology textbooks, it's taught that bile concentrates up to 20 times in the gallbladder. What does
Right.
any hyperconcentrated solution do at rest? It forms precipitate, it forms crystals. And
Hmm.
I was on a rotation, a general surgery rotation, women mostly, but also men, but they had bariatric surgery, for weight loss surgery.
Hmm.
And they were all in with gallstones. And there's very high prevalence of people who get bariatric surgery who then go on to get their gallbladder taken out because of stones. And this one woman was just really upset. And she was just very symptomatic for gallstones. I'm like, look, this is what this is. She's like, no, it can't be. Absolutely not. It's not. And so we ended up doing scans and doing the imaging, show that like, yeah, you definitely have gallstones and you have one that's really stuck in there and you're gonna need surgery. And she said,
Hmm.
look, I need some time to process this because I didn't think there was any way I could possibly have gallstones because I have not eaten fat in 3 months. I have not eaten any fat in 3 months. How the hell can I get this stuff? It's like, that's why you had it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that's
So,
not what people are told. And
no.
women are told to avoid fat. I don't use any hormones.
Oh,
So, I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. Diet, absolutely. Diet, lifestyle. I
Yeah.
mean, if you are not able to synthesize the steroids, the estrogen, or the testosterone, a lot of women are told to take testosterone because they're tired or they don't
Yeah.
have a good libido. Why? Because testosterone is associated with virility in males. Although, I mean, you know, I don't understand why a woman would be told to take testosterone because it's associated with virility in males. Women make testosterone through the steroid hormone cascade anyway. And it is on an as needed basis. All the steroid hormones are synthesized on an as need basis. But if you're constantly stressed, if your cortisol levels are really high, you won't be synthesizing those hormones because the cortisol is all the way to left next to progesterone, and the estrogen and the testosterone all the way to the right. You can't get over there. And the enzymes that actually do the synthesis, aromatase, which turns the androgens into the estrogens, is reduced with high cortisol levels.
Mm.
So it's
Yeah.
just not happening. So if you change lifestyle and if you add the fat that you eat the fat which is the raw material to make the hormones in the first place, and then you reduce stress, which I guess would be lifestyle changes,
Mm.
and you also remove carbohydrates, which high sugar we know causes higher glucose levels, high cortisol levels, right?
Mm.
So then you're addressing the hormones just that way. Why add hormones? If you're adding hormones, you're adding synthetics.
Mm.
So yams and all the things that they make the bioidentical hormones out of are xenoestrogens. Millet, yams, cassava, these are xenoestrogens. It's not the cholesterol
Mm.
cholesterol derived steroid hormones that your body's looking for, that all those receptors in your body are looking for.
One young man, he was 19 years old, and his testosterone was, I mean, it was just bottomed out. It was about like 120. It was just tiny. I mean, he should have had testosterone pouring out of his ears at that age, and yet, very low. If you went to sort of a traditional doctor, would be like, oh, well, you're in, primary testicular failure. You're just not going to make testosterone. You're going to have to be on testosterone the rest of your life. And there are people
Mm-hmm.
like that. There's like Stan Efferding is a professional bodybuilder. That was his story. He was 19. He's in college. He's working out all year and just not getting any gains in the gym. He's just a skinny kid, and went to the doctor, and his testosterone was almost nothing. So oh, okay, here you go. Put him on testosterone. And then of course he figured that if he took testosterone, he'd get results. If he took a lot more testosterone, he'd get a lot more results. And he became a sort of steroid abusing bodybuilder, as openly talks about it. And
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, imagine that the course of his life, how different that would be if his doctor just said, "Hey, what are you eating? Are you drinking too much? You're a freshman in college. Of course you are. Let's
Mm-hmm.
let's focus on what you're doing to your body and see if we can fix that." When I put this kid on a carnivore diet, and he didn't even do it all the way. He still had cheat days and still had some rice every now and then, but just eating a lot more meat and cutting out most everything else and mostly carnivore most days. His testosterone jumped up to 400 in
Mm-hmm.
2 months. I mean, it was nothing. It was no time at all. It was just you just literally just removing the impediments to your body. You just drop the anchor and let your body get on with it. And
Mm-hmm.
I much prefer that approach as well. You've written books on hormonal development and the importance of optimizing hormonal health at different stages. So what should parents be thinking about with their children, their adolescents and teenage children going through puberty to support their hormonal health and development?
Well, I have to add, well, obviously diet, of course, but I have to
Mhm.
also have to add iodine because
Mm.
thyroid hormone actually triggers adolescence in both males and females.
Mm.
And we know that iodine levels you have to have iodine in order to make thyroid hormones, right? That's the raw
Mm.
material for thyroid hormones. So since puberty is triggered by thyroid, TSH goes up, free T3 levels T3 levels go up. They go up because they're needed to grow tissue.
Mm.
You need tissue growth, right? So in females, breasts get bigger, the uterus gets bigger, the ovaries get bigger. Female sexual characteristics are tissue growth.
Mm.
Males too, but to somewhat lesser extent. So they need iodine. Pubertal children, teens need iodine, both male and female. I think females need it more because there's more tissue growth. So that's really important. So the diet, you have to have the fat in order to trigger the androgen hormones in order to make puberty happen. Starts with thyroid, goes to androgen hormones, which would then be obviously fat that we have to eat. And if you have enough of both, then things should be fine.
Okay, great. And so are things like iodized salt enough, or do you recommend people
No,
taking?
no, absolutely not. I recommend Lugol's iodine.
Okay.
That's the old, Jean Lugol's 15% solution, which is now called 5% in the US primarily because basically they're just counting the elemental iodine and not the potassium iodide that is in the solution. So it's actually a 15% iodine,
Mm,
but it is now called 5%.
okay.
And that is an essential nutrient that unfortunately with fluoride and PFAs and all the substances that we have in
Mm,
the world today, which are all substances that interfere with the absorption of iodine.
mm,
So 100 years ago, goiter belts were Bolivia, Switzerland, Michigan, the Tennessee mountains where my family's from. Mountainous areas, the soil doesn't have iodine because it's washed down, right? It's washed away in the soil. But nowadays, because there's so many substances that interfere with the absorption of iodine, it's much, there's a lot more iodine insufficiency. Two drops of, you know, 15/5%. In my menopause book, I wrote about clubbing and drinking and drug
mm,
taking. These are all things that raise cortisol levels. So if you don't, it ultra marathoning. I
mm,
mean, I'm an athlete and I used to run too much and I used to spar too much, and I definitely affected my adrenals. I think that that has to be considered. There's a lot, there are athletes, teenage athletes, they're pushing themselves. They're burning through nutrients so much faster than the people who aren't doing athletic pursuits.
mm,
If your child is athletic and if your child is on a team, you would definitely want to increase the protein, increase the fat, and increase the iodine because they're burning through those nutrients a lot faster than somebody who isn't training for track.
mm,
So those are things that we have to definitely consider, things that are raising cortisol levels. We know from a study that's from 2021, athletes who did really hard, high intensity training on a high fat diet, they recovered much more quickly than people on a carb diet. So things like that.
mm.
So the fat lowers the cortisol, which comes from training. Same. I
Yeah.
mean, we're human beings. We need
Yeah.
those hormones forever from birth, from fetus to death. We
Right.
are synthesizing steroid hormones. So, no, these are the same principles apply.
Perfect.
Yes, definitely. I would give women more fat
Yeah.
than men. It's a difference of 5 to 10%, but it depends
Yeah.
on what you're doing. If a woman says I'm lifting heavy, I'm going to say, yeah, I mean, you want to be sure that you're eating enough protein.
Mm,
But I think that we want to get to the point where we can just listen to the hunger cues. And when there's more stress, you're going to want more fat. When you have less, or you're going to the gym, those days you might want more protein. It really, when you've removed the stimulants, when you've removed the foods that are raising your cortisol levels or causing inflammation, you can hear what your body's saying better.
mm,
You can feel, oh, I want to reach more for some more butter today because it's going to make me calm down. It's going to make me address the stress that I'm experiencing at this time better. Well, I usually for women or any kind of I call it an anti-inflammatory protocol.
mm,
I'm doing 80/20. I'm giving people
mm,
80/20. Depends upon
mm,
obviously it depends upon their height. It depends upon, their height primarily, their structure.
mm,
So we know that 80/20 is they're going to be in ketosis and they're not going to be hungry. I was usually for men, I do 75/25 or maybe 70/30, depends upon the situation. I would say it starts in adolescence.
mm,
There are many children who have, just to give you an example, a hypothyroid mother is going to have a child who is possibly, if she's hypothyroid during her pregnancy, and
mm,
it's not caught because they're just testing TSH and free T4, right?
mm,
Or they're just testing T4 and TSH. I've had so many patients who were pregnant and were afterwards they had postpartum depression, they had issues during delivery, all because of being hypothyroid, or they had the hemorrhaging right
mm,
as when they were giving birth, they they couldn't stop the bleeding. They get hysterectomies. It's really sad. So,
mm.
but all this is due to being hypothyroid. So those children may be predisposed to ward during adolescence because that is when you need more thyroid hormone. May
Yeah.
be predisposed to ward. Possibly when things get more difficult, more nutritionally expensive, shall we say, they need some support. So I mean, one drop for a child is absolutely fine. Iodine is excreted via the urine, comes through the urine. So it's not something you have to worry about. It's an essential nutrient. Well, TSH is not a very good measure
Mhm.
because only, you know that the T4 and T3, T4 is converted into T3, and that conversion is done by deiodinases, right? So certain tissues, D1 tissues, D1 to have D1, and certain other tissues have D2. So the TSH is really only communicating to certain tissues.
Mhm.
Kidney tissue, musculoskeletal tissue. There's a bunch of other tissues that aren't using TSH to communicate to the thyroid. So it's a flawed measure from the get-go.
What are some of
Mhm.
the different minerals and nutrients that you might look for in a patient to see how to best support them?
I don't. I just make them eat a carnivore
No, you mean
diet.
even
They're
better.
all in, they're all in our meat. Why should we? So, for example, selenium is very easily toxic.
Hmm.
Too much selenium will
Yeah.
prevent hormone conversion. So people are popping 200 micrograms of,
Mm.
and they're eating Brazil nuts.
No.
Brazil nuts are horrible. So it
So
depends
bad.
on where the soil, certain trees have more more selenium than other trees, nuts, right? It's like tea. Why tea is so bad? Because the tea plants are grown in fluoride-rich soil, which prevents iodine absorption.
Mhm.
So the body is looking for these minerals in meat. It's not looking for Brazil nuts, selenium, or zinc from, I don't know what kind of supplement company made it. It's all part of the same. Why would they require them?
Yeah.
It just confounds me why. The same thing with thyroid. Women need thyroid hormone, need carbohydrates to have adequate thyroid hormone levels. I don't know where this is coming from. There were studies in the 80s that showed that when you put somebody on an 800 calorie diet, their T3 levels would go down. Well, sure, they're starving. Your body's going to not produce an active growth hormone, an activity hormone, a metabolic hormone if there's no metabolism, if there's no food in order for it to grow any tissue.
Hmm.
So it, I don't know where this is coming from. So I know the thyroid one is coming from that. And they're actually one of those studies, they saw that if you added more fat, the T3 levels would come back a lot faster. So
Mm.
it's just ludicrous. No, women do not need carbohydrates to make hormones. They're all made out of fat, Anthony.
Not that long ago, people had to do things intuitively. We had to be out
Mhm.
in the wild and just eating naturally. And what about that time period? And we didn't have bonbons back then. We didn't have, confectionery stores. We just had what we had available in the
Mhm.
wild. You would go and dig up some tubers or something like that, and something would have to tell you naturally to do that, which doesn't make sense.
No, it
And
didn't do that.
yeah,
It
exactly.
didn't do that. We evolved to eat the meat, and our bodies changed tremendously, and our health deteriorated tremendously from the advent of agriculture. We know that the obstetrical dilemma, women
Mm.
having babies it was a lot more easier for women to give birth when we were hunter-gatherers than since the advent of agriculture, when we started eating carbohydrates. Our hips changed, the shape changed.
Oh, interesting.
So that is enough of and I talk about that in the new book.
Mhm.
uh, it's actually called the obstetrical dilemma. Why do women die during childbirth? Why is it so difficult and painful? Because we started eating carbohydrates.
Mm.
That is it. Humans have big heads because we have our huge brain, which we
Mhm.
developed by eating meat and fat.
Mhm.
So when we started eating carbohydrates, that didn't change,
Mhm.
but the bone structure changed. The female bone
Mhm.
structure changed.
And I
We're a lot
do,
shorter too. Sorry, we're a lot
yeah,
shorter too.
yeah, definitely, yeah, and birth weights have gone up too, and that's the thing too. When you see gestational diabetes is associated with larger birth weights, and that's
Hmm.
going to come from carbohydrates as well. You have this sort of
Yeah.
precocious growth. It's not necessarily that their brains are bigger or more developed and that they're better. It's just that
Hmm.
they're inflated with insulin and carbohydrates. People trying to say that, like, well, yes, heads are getting bigger, the babies are getting bigger, and we're just evolving, we're getting bigger brains. Well, no, we're not. We got smaller brains on average since
Right.
before
Yeah,
agriculture.
definitely smaller.
Yeah, and so like 11% smaller for men, and I've found 17% smaller for women on average, and that was
Hmm.
immediately after agriculture, and that's persisted until today. And then in sort of in the last century, we've had higher birth weights, higher and higher birth weights. And they're saying, well, this is just we're evolving to get bigger. And like that's not how evolution works. This doesn't go that quick. Just in 100 years, slam, all these things change. It's some sort of environmental issue. And
Hmm.
we're abnormally growing these kids so that they have abnormally high birth weights. And now we have misshapen pelvis
Yeah, well, it's also a lot of other, I mean, puberty is happening, what, 7 and 8? It used to happen
Yeah.
in 16, 18.
Mm.
All this because of carbohydrates.